The brand you see here on my screen spent $863 at a 5.7x ROAS a couple of days ago. This other brand you see here on my screen, a day before that other brand, spent $19,237 at a much higher ROAS. And in this video, I want to help you understand the three major differences between a brand that's spending $30,000 a month on the Google Ads platform versus a brand that spends $30,000 every 2 days. Starting with the very first difference of reach. The reality is this brand that spent $19,000 to do a six-figure day just in a single random day in May has a lot more reach on a general top of the funnel level than this brand, which is still doing fairly decent, but at a 10-20 times lower level of scale, purely because this first brand right here has not only been active for over a decade at this point, running Google Ads, running Meta Ads, and just being all over the internet, but in addition to that, this brand gone and done advertising on different TV shows and different TV networks. Along with the fact that this brand is also fairly active on Meta Ads, on TikTok Ads, Taboola, and everything you could literally imagine. The reach is tremendous, but on a surface level, when it comes to Google Ads specifically, this reach was created through a whole ecosystem approach this brand implemented during the start to get to this level of scale. Compare this to this other brand that's still doing fairly decent. It's in the scaling phase at this point of time. However, the reach is not necessarily at a 10 times lower level in terms of the monthly search volume, because the matter of the fact is the products that this brand sells, there's almost the same amount of monthly search volume as this other brand right here for the products they sell. The only difference is this brand, although it started over 10 years ago as well, did not accumulate the same level of reach and scale the other brand did. It did not go on any big TV shows, it does not have celebrities using their products, and it definitely is reliant on either Google Ads or Meta Ads for scale. Basically, all of their eggs are in one basket. But the real success and the real scale here for the brand that's spending multi-five figures almost at this point on a daily basis just on Google is the fact that they implemented the 80-20 rule when they were getting to this level of scale. Look, your brand might not be in a situation where it can spend this much level of money without the results, because at the end of the day, the ROI should be what drives the business forward. But to get to that level of scale, focusing on the 80-20 rule is literally the best thing you can do for your brand right now. And this rule essentially says 80% of your efforts should be going towards the top 20% of the marketing channels, platforms, campaigns that are driving the revenue forward. And in your current situation, that might just be Google Ads and specifically a few campaigns you have running that are driving the business forward. Or that might mean Meta Ads and a specific creative which you found was a winning creative, and you put 80% of your budget towards that 20% of the overall marketing strategy, which is driving majority of the scale. But with the rest of the 20% of the budget, your goal should be to increase that reach, should be to reach your perfect customer, to reach your perfect demographic exactly where they are and meet them halfway in the middle. This goes beyond just the normal platforms you see, such as Meta Ads, TikTok Ads, Google Ads, because the reality is this brand, when it was in its glow up period, essentially was on platforms you would not even imagine. Reddit, WhatsApp, Taboola Ads, Shark Tank. It took the road less traveled. It basically went through these different avenues, tested them to figure out what worked amongst all of these different platforms, which not majority of the competitors were on. And then from there, applied the 80-20 rule within that specific segment of audience, within that specific segment of a placement, again, replicating their success over and over again. And this is the great thing about reach. Once you start to gain some momentum on a specific ad platform, it's not very difficult to double, triple down on it, focusing on the 80-20 rule, but some of your budget, some of the overall profits that you are generating back should be going towards these other avenues of growth and testing specific segments which your competition is not doing, which directly kind of ties into the second difference between both of these brands. And this is what I call the blue ocean strategy. Look, majority of the campaign success that we are able to derive for this brand, because this is a brand we handle Google Ads for under my agency, comes directly through their video creatives, through their assets that they have. First and foremost, they spent millions of dollars on photography. They spend millions of dollars on just video assets. Right now, in the day and age we live in, you don't need to be spending millions to generate high quality images, high quality videos, because a single software, a single AI script can do all of that for you. But essentially, what we found out, the road less traveled for this brand, which was essentially our blue ocean, was YouTube campaigns and YouTube placement. Majority of the success we were driving was coming from shopping campaigns, for example. It was coming from performance max campaigns along with search. But to really kind of move the needle to get the brand to the next level, we had to have another top of the funnel traffic segment in place, which 95% of the competition was avoiding. In this industry, it was YouTube. And because this brand had such a big appearance on video ads in terms of the TV ads that they were doing, the Shark Tank clips that they had, and just overall all of the video assets they were creating for Meta and TikTok ads, all we did was re-optimize it for the Google Ads audience and focus not on the conversions that we see on the front end view, because if you look right here on a front end, this might seem extremely unprofitable, but rather focusing on a segment, focusing on a specific piece of data that is known as view-through conversions. Because as you see right here, these YouTube campaigns have driven some of the highest levels of view-through conversions compared to any of the other campaigns running at this point of time. And in simple words, a view-through conversions is essentially a conversion that gets driven in the back end through one of the major campaigns that we have running at this point of time, which means somebody was watching a YouTube video, then they went on Google, then they typed in a specific word, for example, a 3D printer, then they saw the ad from this brand, because now they were a retargeting customer at this point because they had come through a YouTube video they had already watched, and that was allowing us to really pump up the overall ROI and the revenue for all of these other campaigns we had running through these view-through conversions. Although the overall sale on the front end was attributed to these other campaigns like a shopping campaign, like a performance max, in the back end, this YouTube campaign was driving the view-through conversion and Google was recording it, which allowed us to essentially push more of whatever was already working and driving a lot more view-through conversions. And obviously having a heavy creative influx, having constant creatives getting put in the mix on a daily basis at this point allowed this brand to exponentially scale. Compare that to this brand on the other hand, which essentially, although it has a solid establishment in terms of social media traffic, it does have a reputation in its industry. The unfortunate thing is, because of the lack of creatives for this brand, because they don't have any sorts of video assets that we can use to run on YouTube, they don't have any sorts of high quality assets to even begin with, because a lot of the creatives they do have is artificially intelligence driven and it's just created with ChatGPT or Claude. At this point, we are limited to basically performance max campaigns and search campaigns. And to top it off, to make matters worse, essentially some of the products they sell can be limited by policy violations because of the industry and niche they are in, which is medical equipment. So as a result, we are tied down to a specific set of campaign strategies, to a specific set of segments we can only target. And this makes it much more difficult to achieve a blue ocean approach, or to achieve a blue ocean strategy for a brand like this. However, it is still possible, and we have made it happen by, instead of focusing on a blue ocean on a broad level, going into the audience segment, for example, targeting a specific category of audiences that type a certain keyword via these search campaigns, or even with performance max campaigns, showing up to only specific assets based on a certain segments of the audience. And instead of going after 10 different segment audiences, or instead of going after a big audience segment within the industry, we are choosing to go after a little bit of a smaller pocket of the audience, but hone in on exactly how they speak, what their problems are, what their issues are, and how our products solve their key problems to essentially scale this brand in that small segment before we attack bigger market cap. But in simple words, the only way that you are going to achieve a blue ocean strategy for your brand is by focusing on the specific segment of the audience where 95% of your competition is not in at this point of time. Because if you just go after a specific segment that everybody else is going after, if you do the same exact approaches, tactics, strategies like your competition, there's a good chance you will blend in, and the moment you blend in with Google is the moment your brand starts to lose. This brings essentially what I've seen now working with over 550 e-commerce brands handling Google Ads for them, which, by the way, way, if you run a brand making $50,000 a month or more in revenue, you need some extra help scaling to the next level with Google Ads, scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below to directly schedule a call with me, and let's see how we can potentially work together to make all of this happen. But this brings us to the biggest difference of all, difference number 3, which is the jack of all trades approach versus a master of one. This bigger brand right here not only has a lot of reach in different audience segments and different pools of the audience, but in the start, they decided to go in and focus on one specific key market of their entire market. This is essentially a fashion brand going after people who are in athletics, so out and about often, doing sports, so on and so forth. But instead of going after all of the different audience segments of athletes, for example, going after basketball players, going after golf players, baseball players, so on and so forth, they decided to hone in on one specific target demographic and only create ads based around them, what they preferred, what they didn't prefer, that general concept of that audience. Compare that to this brand right here, where essentially, if we look at the total number of products they have, we can see the overall product selection, the catalog, at this point, essentially 2,000 SKUs, but every single product goes after a different demographic. One of these products can be up to $50,000. The other product can be $14. It's a very, very vast and diverse market, which means it's targeting tens and hundreds of different pockets of the audience. And the key here is to essentially hone in on a specific market audience, figure out exactly who your perfect demographic is, how they speak, what they like to do, what they don't like to do, and literally figure out every single detail about that target demographic to then expand your marketing based on that. And this kind of goes back to the previous difference I had mentioned as well, which was focusing on that blue ocean strategy. I can tell you from experience, it's 10 times easier to find a blue ocean strategy when you know exactly who you're talking to versus you're doing an approach where you're talking to 10 different audience segments at all. Now, this doesn't mean that now you need to stop selling all of your products and just go after a select few products. What this does mean is understanding what audience you're targeting and what key pain point solutions your products provide to that demographic, so that every single campaign strategy you implement, so that every single audience segment you go after, it speaks exactly to that ideal demographic. Because in 2026, being the jack of all trades is the worst thing you can do if your goal is to stand out, if your goal is to scale. But the only thing stopping your brand from achieving scale at this level where you're spending thousands of dollars in a single day, it's not essentially your products themselves. It's not even essentially the way you have set up your campaigns. It purely has to do with how you're approaching scale to begin with, how your brand is laid out, and who it's going after. Because to wrap it all up, having some sort of horizontal scale only after knowing exactly who you're targeting and then focusing on a blue ocean aspect of your demographic is where your brand will truly scale. I know this works because this is exactly how we scale brands under my agency, which, by the way, if you run a brand making $50,000 a month or more in revenue, you need some extra help scaling to the next level with Google Ads, scan the QR code on the screen to directly schedule a call with me, and let's see how we can potentially work together to make all of this happen.